Are the James Franklin to Alabama rumors legit? Probably not after they landed not one, but two starting caliber cornerbacks out of the transfer portal.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Penn State fans? That is right. You are Locked On Nittany Lions. Thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, and joining me is the recruiting expert for the Locked On Podcast Network, and that is Brian Smith. And because we bring Brian Smith back on, the expert with recruiting, how about the expert with job recruiting sponsoring today's episode, and that is LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Brian, we're going to be discussing more than just recruiting in this case. I encourage everybody to subscribe to the channel if you're not already an everydayer. Go check out what Brian does with Locked On Seminoles, because they might see a coaching change, and that's what we're going to discuss in this opening segment here. But subscribe to this channel, subscribe to his channel as well, and of course, wherever you get your podcasts. James Franklin, linked to the Alabama job. I didn't lose any sleep over it because I didn't see there was no smoke for me, so there was certainly no fire. But anytime there's a Power 4, because it's not Power 5 anymore, Power 4 job vacancy, it seems like James Franklin is linked to it because it's been Florida and USC, and those ones made a little more sense to me. But Brian, Alabama did not. So I was never concerned or never had a doubt that James Franklin wasn't going to be at Penn State for the foreseeable future in this case. Alabama never worried me.
Yeah, when I saw that and I saw James' name on there, I just went, nope. And that was it.
Not happening.
I never gave it a second thought. He would not be accepted at Alabama.
No, he wouldn't. No, he wouldn't.
Not even realistically. They have a higher aspiration for game day coaching.
Oof.
They just do. So unless the AD doesn't ever want to be seen in public again, he will not make that hire. So I know that's not a very nice way to put it, but I mean, Alabama fans are very arrogant because they just had Nick Saban. So I do not envy, by the way, the AD there. No matter what he does, he's not going to even – nobody can replace Nick Saban. So
yeah,
good luck on that.
Well, and that's just it. Alabama's a coveted job because there's everything. There's the resources, there's the alignment, and there's just the overall support. There's yes, everyone's going to be a fair weather fan to some extent, but do you really want to be the person that follows in the footsteps of a Nick Saban that just won 6 national titles at Alabama, 7 as a whole? Those are massive shoes to fill. So from that perspective, do you think there's actually concerns from any prospective candidate that's like, I don't know what I'm getting myself into there, so maybe I wait this one out?
I think a lot of people would, rightfully so. Their old saying still holds true, Zach. Be careful for what one wishes. You just might get it. I am about to move to the state of Alabama, and I've covered the program. I was at the last Iron Bowl, etc. The way they view football in that state is unlike any other. They do not care what anybody else thinks. They have to win every single time, no excuses. I mean, they completely unrealistic. But Saban has come as close to it as possible. So it's just not for very many people. And for somebody that's not from that area, man, that's hard. So unless you've coached in the Deep South, etc., and at a prominent program, it'd be really hard. But then again, DeBoer is on the list. He's just a great coach, obviously, taking Washington to the national title game. He could be the next coach. It's possible.
Yeah.
That would be weird. Seattle to Tuscaloosa. That's about as far away culturally as you could possibly get. So I'd imagine that would be pretty wild. So, again, I don't think Franklin would want the job. And to be honest, I wouldn't want him to take it either. I don't think it's a very good fit for hardly anybody.
And the fact that, so James Franklin in the original reporting wasn't exactly linked to Alabama. It was only that secondary reporting, because I go back to Pete Thamel's first post on X, formerly known as Twitter, and they had the original list. And then it was updated in a matter of minutes to include James Franklin. What do you take on that, Brian? Because I look at that and say, someone's agent is doing a little bit of overtime here.
There's possibility with that, but it's also clickbait. It's also just
Mhm.
strategic, just opening it up. Penn
Sure.
State's fan base is massive. That could have been nothing to do with Pete. That could have been a lot to do with his editor. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, because I've been in these kinds of meetings, how do we get more people to click on this? Is the only thing that is really a question in something. Because that's how we all get paid. Penn State's got a lot of fans. He's going to get linked to every job.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. So until it's announced that James Franklin is leaving Penn State, I wouldn't put a lot of stock in it. And why would he leave? It's a great gig anyway. So
For him, right.
yeah, I mean, he seems happy there. Why
He
would you
has and
take
he has
on?
everything for the first time outside of, okay, are Georgia's facilities better? Yes. Are Michigan's
Yeah,
facilities
it's
better?
not that big
Yes.
a deal.
But
But
does he have everything from the extensive buyout, the annual? Because I look at Dan Lanning, I look at Kalen DeBoer, and they're not making as much money because they're younger, right? Kalen
true.
DeBoer hasn't been at Washington a long time, and Dan Lanning's 37. So it's understandably so that these guys are making only, right? Only $4 million as an annual salary, whereas guys like Nick Saban were making 10 million plus, right? So those guys are eventually due for a payday. And Dan Lanning was linked to the Alabama job because he was a one-time graduate assistant, but really doesn't have any other connections there other than that. Kalen DeBoer certainly doesn't have any connections to Alabama. And then Mike Norvell, you cover with Locked On Seminoles for Florida State, he's linked to Alabama. So out of those three candidates, and I know that I just saw that Dan Lanning's going to stay. It was the rumors. Apparently, it was false reporting. I'm not sure what to make all of it. There were just people that were reporting that Dan Lanning was in Tuscaloosa. Whether it was right or wrong, we'll just go with it. But Dan Lanning himself said he is staying. So now it seems like what? It's down to Florida State's head coach and Mike Norvell. And then, because I want to bring this back to Penn State with that, does Mike Norvell or Kalen DeBoer leave for the Alabama job in your mind?
I think it would make more sense for Norvell because he's a Southern guy,
Okay.
but he's coached at Memphis, etc. But at the same time, I don't know if anybody, even mine, he's a good coach.
Mhm.
I don't know if anybody is ready to take on that job. So fit is a very, very subjective term for this particular coaching
Yep.
search because you're not
Yep.
replacing the Alabama head coach.
No.
You're replacing arguably the most successful head coach in any sport on any continent in the last 50 years.
Yeah.
How the hell do you do that?
Yeah.
It's nothing against Norvell or DeBoer or anybody else.
Mhm.
Like I just saw Tommy Reese's interview. There's no way in the world Tommy Reese is getting that job.
No.
-5 billion. And by the way, he was at Notre Dame as a player and as a coach. They're trying to draw those clicks in because that's as massive a fan base as there is
Yeah.
too. So yeah, if he gets it, I will podcast for as long as I can for the hilarious commentary and do go live because Alabama fans will be seeking out death and destruction if that happens. But it'll be interesting if there's anybody else because the AD put out the post from Alabama. Hey, if you didn't hear it from me and he's not going to give anything, don't
Mhm.
believe it. Well, all ADs say that. So you're irrelevant at this point. Yeah, there's no way everybody's going to be quiet. Zero chance. So this is where we are. We're all guessing, and nobody's going to sit around on their hands on this.
So it's not that I'm interested in the Franklin to Alabama rumors, and I never was. I'm interested in the domino effect from this, Brian.
Yes.
What if Mike Norvell leaves Florida State? Because that's a spot that I see. Florida State has a good reason to call James Franklin and see it, or his agent and say, hey, are you interested? Make the phone call, see what happens. And same thing with Washington. Do I think Washington's a little bit more of a stretch than Florida State? Absolutely. But James Franklin has connections to Florida. He does. When Florida opened up, when USC opened up, those are the two that I always keep an eye on for the James Franklin coaching rumors, the coaching carousel in college football as legitimate destinations for James Franklin to consider. And I know it was a lot closer than people think about. I don't have any inside sources, but what I do know is that USC was pushing for him hard before they even settled on Lincoln Riley. That was James Franklin was someone that they really wanted to come to USC. It just didn't work out. But then Dan Lanning's staying at Oregon. I think that one's a possible destination as well. Just more serious of a contender for James Franklin to leave than Alabama. Alabama's never going to concern me, but Oregon, Washington now, and Florida State would. They all do.
Yeah, those are all different situations. The alumni base, what they want, what they expect, personality. And that's why following any search is fun. Florida
Yeah.
State obviously has its own icon in Bobby Bowden. It worked out for them. They got a national title out of that, but that's the exception, not the rule.
Yeah.
I don't think you can count on too many guys wanting to replace Nick, though. That's why a lot of the names I was kind of looking through the list like you, and I'm like, nah, I don't see too many of these. Like Jane, I'm like, nah, I don't see that. What I would be curious about also, just to add on to your point, coordinators changing jobs will go bananas, which will then do two more things, the portal and recruiting.
Yep.
Kids pick coaches, not schools. All the people out there in Penn State land can throw stuff at their computers based on that statement, but it ain't going to change it. It's just the way it is. If there is a massive piece that moves from one school to the next, everything churns. Happened a couple years ago when Lincoln Riley took the USC job and then Brian Kelly took the LSU job, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
All of those things make it really unique. And the portal just closed. It doesn't open again until mid-April. So the different rule with that is, though, if your coach leaves, your head coach, I don't know about coordinator. I don't know about the coordinator. It's a 30-day window for that school. It's wild. But what if it happens in like February? You're in the middle of a semester. I mean, there's so many pieces of this that are weird. It makes it fun to follow, though. I just wouldn't want to be the administrator trying to figure out transcripts.
Absolutely. And in this case, I understand how important academics are, but I also have to default back to what a younger Cardell Jones said, former Ohio State quarterback.
Oh boy.
You don't go to play school. That's all I'm going to say. So I think these football players would figure it out if they wanted to move based on coordinators and coaches. I think these schools, that's just the way it is. That's just the nature of it. I know they're student athletes, but they would find a way. So let's discuss that in the next segment, Brian. Now, Penn State did get A.J. Harris. They got Jalen Kimber to commit. So Penn State, biggest concern was the secondary after the Peach Bowl against Ole Miss and the way that Jackson Dart and those wide receivers of Trey Harris were able to expose what Penn State had as backup cornerbacks. But now Penn State addressed that issue. But I also am curious to talk about how Penn State can benefit from Nick Saban retiring here and which players might be a focal point for Penn State to get in the transfer portal or in high school recruiting. That's coming up next on Locked On Nittany Lions. And today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. It is easy to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs, then add your job in the purple hiring frame to let people know that you are in fact hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and just the right experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and then hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus the leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel, the official sports book of Locked On. The NFL regular season is wrapped up, but the playoffs are now here, and there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is super easy to use. I use it personally, and there's so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. You can now find bets in the new Explore tab. Make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays. So those bets are already made for you, and there's so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. And the Locked On Podcast Network is making history. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you. 24/7 covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus the national shows covering each and every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. AJ Harris and Jalen Kimber. We'll begin with them before we try to see if Penn State pick up any former Alabama commits from the high school spot, Rico Scott, or any transfers possibly, because we've already seen that Julian Sayin, quarterback commit, is just scratching his head, doesn't know what to do, posted a GIF on X, formerly known as Twitter, of him jumping ship, abandoning ship, and we've already seen one of the best wide receivers in the country decommit from Alabama as well. AJ Harris comes from the SEC. Former Georgia player, according to Rivals, a top 50 cornerback. And Penn State fans, the Penn State fanatics, did a lot of research here, good detective work, I might add, and found AJ Harris and Jalen Kimber in the Penn State student directory before they announced their commitments. So they were enrolled all along, Brian. So we kind of knew this one was coming. It was just a matter of time for the announcement. But Penn State added not only one, but two cornerbacks to probably what was going to be the weakest position group going into next season.
AJ Harris is from Central High School in Phoenix City, Alabama, by the way. He was my favorite corner in that class. He's an elite player. Didn't work out at Georgia, but they're loaded at corner, and Georgia's loaded at every spot. So they probably have extra people at Waterboy. So the point is still the same, though. Very talented 6'1" kid. They can run and change direction. He's going to play. Kimber has been a kid that's kind of been all over the map. I don't know what to expect, but he was a highly recruited kid out of Dallas, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
You know, nothing else, you're getting an experienced player that was physically able to go and play an SEC ball. So either way, they should be in pretty good spot. As far as future guys, look, former podcaster here on this network, John Garcia, a good close friend of mine and somebody you know.
Yeah.
He put out an article because he knows the state of Alabama really well, like 5 guys. And I didn't even read it yet or call John, but 5 guys Alabama needs to keep in their class. Like, this stuff is serious. When you lose your coach, it didn't used to be this way, but when you lose your coach, you can get out of it.
Yeah.
And Alabama fans are probably freaking out about that as much as anything, because Saban had more than 10 number 1 recruiting classes. Say that out loud. More than 10 number 1 recruiting classes.
Must be nice.
Yeah, it's not that hard. And they're not going to do that moving forward. They're not going to sniff it. Yeah. And this could be that kind of the undoing. It's very important, Penn State or otherwise, to follow the dominoes, because it's only 24 hours in. It's going to take a little bit. They all want to see, okay, who the hell are we hiring? That's fair. Mm-hmm. But, you know, they kind of have to figure this out. A lot of these kids were enrolled or they want to go somewhere else. They got really about the reason they probably wanted it done at the end of the week was recruiting. They're not going to admit that, but it's to keep this class and these kids from leaving. Because I guarantee you there's a lot of illegal activity right now trying to get these guys to bolt. College football is a complete cesspool anyway, and everybody pretty much hates Alabama that's not Alabama. So they're not going to shed a tear, and nobody's turning each other in on it. I guarantee you. Penn State could pick up just about anybody. Yeah. It's completely Pandora's box on who could end up being in the portal or backing out of their letter of intent.
I'm going back to Harris and Kimber, and because you mentioned it, Harris from Alabama. Elliott Washington was committed to Alabama, and you just wouldn't expect that whatsoever, which has been so – everyone criticizes James Franklin. You opened up the show saying that Alabama wants a good game day head coach, and James Franklin is just not that. But he knows how to build a program. He knows how to recruit. He knows how to build a good coaching staff. He does a lot of other things very well, and I'd argue at an elite level. But, yes, you would like to see game day be a little better because that's it. You need wins on the football field besides the point. But the fact that Penn State is able to get recruits from the state of Florida to go up against the likes of Auburn, right? It made so much sense to me if AJ Harris had flipped to Auburn because they need starters at cornerback as well. He's from the state of Alabama. And the way that you mentioned illegal, I'll go a step, I'll add on to that, unethical, whether it's legal or not, it's definitely unethical. Auburn, and how about Louisville? Jalen Kimber was verbally committed to Louisville, and now he's enrolled at Penn State. So the work that James Franklin and this staff have done to fend off the likes of Auburn, who throw millions of dollars everywhere, Louisville, who throw millions of dollars and allegedly unethically as well. The fact that Penn State, of all places, was able to beat out that kind of competition in the age of NIL, in the age of transfer portal, to get a former top 50 recruit, And somebody who was already verbally committed to one of those programs that are not afraid to be one of the sleaziest in NIL is nothing short of impressive to me, Brian. It's really.
Yeah. The one thing I will not bitch about with that entire staff is their effort in recruiting. They're one of the top 5 staffs, I think, conservatively in overall effort. I think Miami and Penn State were probably the 2 best overall that I saw this year. Alabama and Georgia don't really count because they got 190 million people in the back office. I don't even know how you grade them. It's different, but their head coaches, obviously, Nick and Kirby, put a lot of effort into recruiting, and it shows in the rankings. But the other schools, like Miami and Penn State, would be the ones right off the bat for me that I'm like, they get it. And that's the number one thing, man, building relationships. James must be a nice guy. I've never met him, don't know him, but I'm assuming he is because he gets a lot of kids that I didn't think he had one iota of a chance. Elliott Washington's a kid I knew well.
Yeah.
I remember walking up to him and I'm like, why'd you flip to Penn State? He goes, I just liked it better. They recruited me hard. I was like, okay, whatever. It's just, he just enjoyed it. They never gave up on him, even though he committed to Bama. Most schools do. They don't like battling Bama because it doesn't end well very often.
Mm-hmm.
Franklin and his staff bypassed that thought process, and they got some good players doing it.
All right. So now you bring up specifically the relationship that Elliott Washington had to Alabama and then Penn State. So here we go again, deja vu. And now this time, Nick Saban is out of the conversation. So we go back to Rico Scott, who is in the state of Pennsylvania. This one was because Elliott Washington, state of Florida, committed to Alabama. Why does Penn State have a shot? But this time, Rico Scott in central Pennsylvania, going down to Alabama, just lost his head coach. And that's what, take the translation of it as you will, but I'll try to translate a picture of him because his quarterback tried to recruit him to go to Kentucky. That's where his high school quarterback is committed. And he said, hey, come to Kentucky with me. And Rico Scott simply responded with a picture of him and Nick Saban. Well, that photo's great and all, but Nick Saban is no longer there. So your argument or the reason why you were staying with the Crimson Tide isn't exactly as valid anymore. And not that needs to be said. So Penn State trying to flip Rico Scott, but he's signed with them. I had to double check that. He's already signed with them. You mentioned about the spring transfer portal. We've already said that because you don't go to school to play. You don't go to these schools to play school. You go to play football. Okay. That's not my opinion. That's other people's opinion. But what is the workaround here? Does Penn State have a shot at getting Rico Scott back when they still need wide receivers? They can still add to this class. And there is the signing period in February. He has to get released from his letter. I think that can work, but what all would need to happen? And can Penn State even get his attention to commit to the Nittany Lions?
At this point, I don't think they can do anything. It's all on Rico. That's my understanding. But this is an area that I wouldn't want to touch with a 10-foot pole if I was in the court of law. And that's basically what this is as well, because it's contract. You're signing a contract with the school for grant and aid, for room and board and all that.
Yep. Free education. Yep.
So I don't know the whole deal, but if I remember correctly, it's 30 days from the time that head coach is gone. The gray area with this is if that were to ever happen at a time that it's not around a signing day, what if that happened in the spring or summer and they took 2 months to hire a coach? The heck is the guy supposed to do? So I don't think the NCAA yet again has figured this out. That, it's 30 days or until they hire the next coach the guy should have. But what if it goes beyond the February, I think it's February 7th? What if it goes beyond that? Like, how does that work? And I don't know. But at the same time, Penn State, if he comes in, you would think they would be the first choice if he decided not to go to Bama. I know they really tried to flip him. And I wouldn't put it past him to try to get somebody else that's committed at another spot too. Why not? So they recruited most of the kids. They went after Alabama, Georgia, Florida. Anything is possible. I wouldn't get caught up on Rico just because he's from PA.
Okay.
I wrote about this before. Kids didn't pick Bama. They picked Saban. That picture that Rico had is proof of that. So you brought it up aptly. Bama fans really don't want to hear that, but it's true. And kids a lot of times went against the school they grew up rooting for. Their parents want them to go to the in-state school, but I wanted to be coached by Nick Saban. All that's out the window. So anything is possible in the next week to 2 weeks to see kids getting out of their letter of intent. You could see kids trying to at least take visits. And again, I don't know how this works when a kid is already signed. This is a very unique scenario. So I'm learning on the fly a little bit here. It's fun, but it's a little frustrating too, because I'm sure there are nuances to it that I'm unaware of.
Well, and I'm sure we'll definitely continue to update this on a week-to-week basis as the news comes in. Alabama makes its head coaching decision. Players enter the portal. Players ask for a release of their letter of intent. All of that can change so much. Now, let's look towards the future here as Penn State in the class of 2025, and that's probably something that Penn State's going to focus on because we've seen Ryan Williams decommit from Alabama's class of
Right.
2025. I'm not referring to him though. Pennsylvania's top high school prospect doesn't commit to the Nittany Lions, and Penn State had a streak of landing the number one recruit to come, whether it was out of the portal or originally, has ended. And it's because a rival was able to get that commitment. We'll discuss on the other side of this break. Today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. You got to download the Game Time app because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for everything: music, sports, comedy, theater near you. Some of the things that I like about the Game Time experience, because I've used the Game Time app to buy tickets before. You get last minute tickets, but you get flash deals on those last minute tickets. So how about that? Saving money on last second tickets. It's also easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. You search locally and you get everything listed for you. And probably the best feature is the image views of the seats. You're not second guessing. You're not wondering, hey, am I going to be in the right spot? Am I going to have the right view? Game Time has that for you accurately before you get to the event. Game Time is the place to get those last second deals on everything: football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. You name it. So snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. And remember, if you're not already an everyday or become one, subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Also subscribe to all the incredible work that Brian does with Locked On Seminoles to get Florida State coverages. The coaching carousel is going to move around, so his show is just as important if you want to, get an understanding of everything that could go on here. Penn State misses out on the top recruit in the state of Pennsylvania for the class of 2025. This one is a little surprising for a variety of reasons. One, Penn State, I still think, needs defensive line help, and that's Zahir Mathis, who I'm referring to. Zahir Mathis is currently, depending on where you look, but consistently the number one prospect out of the state of Pennsylvania, and Penn State has made it a point. Dominate the state, and they've had a streak of it, whether it was a transfer in Julian Fleming and Nolan Rucci, or actually consistently getting the guys in Nicholas Singleton or Javen Williams. The streak is now ended for now. Penn State's not going to stop recruiting him, as we've talked about that in the last segment, Brian. But this one is a little surprising to me, and it honestly stings a little bit because Deion Barnes, and I've given him a lot of credit. I just did a podcast saying how great he was and talked to a former teammate of his with Brandon Bell. I agree that Deion Barnes has become one of the best defensive line coaches in all of the country. But if you're going to have that standard, if you're going to have that expectation, this is not acceptable. You're from Philadelphia. Zahir Mathis is from Philadelphia. You've been with the team. It's not like you just showed up. You were a player, you were a grad assistant, and now you're the defensive line coach. So you've always had conversations with Zahir Mathis. And then he goes and commits to your rival, Ohio State, who you're chasing. Larry Johnson coached at Penn State. I get that. I understand all of it, but I don't know if it's because it stings a little bit since it is close to home, but I feel like there's no reason Penn State shouldn't have gotten Mathis with all those different connections now aligned at Penn State currently going into 2025.
The only thing I could figure there's some kind of connection to Ohio State, family member, somebody that trained him. There's almost always a backstory to this that's not public. And like most fan bases, Penn State fans will have blinders on and not understand and all that. But sometimes kids are just going to leave no matter what you do. And if Barnes didn't recruit him well, that'll come out in the woodwork at some point. But my guess is kid just didn't want to stay in state. I watched a little of his film again. I'd seen him before, but very long defensive end, needs definitely to add weight. He may end up being a redshirt kid, but he's going to play 3 years and consider going to the NFL. That'd be my guess.
No.
and you can't teach the length, man. He had a whole bunch of pass breakups just at the line of scrimmage because of his length. Completely blocked, just jumped up. He's one of those guys you throw alley-oops to, just really long and lean. That's what he reminds me of a wing forward. So, yeah, that hurts, but there's a long way to go, and it's one player. I wouldn't put a lot of stock in it.
And I imagine that the conversation that Larry Johnson had with him that, hey, we had the Bosa brothers, we had Chase Young, we have JT Tuimoloau, and we have Jack Sawyer as well. Penn State only has Chop Robinson and Adisa Isaac in the past 5 years, if you compare the two sides. And I guess that's a fair argument. The more the merrier, because this one reminds me, even though Chase Young was I went to school with him. I don't know him well on a personal level, but he's from the Maryland area, DC area. This is what I would compare this to, because Chase Young was down to Ohio State and Penn State. Zahir Mathis was down to Ohio State and Penn State and shunned the Nittany Lions for the Buckeyes.
Again, personal preference, brother. Sometimes kids just want to fly. And Philly might have been too close. That happens. And again, you got to give Ohio State credit. I mean, they've been the most dominant program in the Big Ten until the last few years, and it's still Ohio State too.
Yeah.
So I would bet you there's something that's a connection for him, especially for him to commit this early. I was like, what?
Yeah.
Why not? Even if it was Penn State, why would you commit now?
Yeah.
Like, what's the operative gain here? I thought that would, not the Ohio State part, nothing against Penn State. Why would a kid that's potentially a top 25 national player commit in the middle of January? So it's recruiting's different, and I understand that, but I just thought that was interesting because he could pick his school. Maybe he just wants to go to Ohio State.
I think it just also goes back to when Penn State is going up head-to-head, when it's just the final two schools are Penn State versus Ohio State, it seems like the Buckeyes win that recruiting battle 9 times out of 10. And I think back to the likes of Terrell Pryor, for example, and Chase Young. It's almost when it's those two one-on-one against each other, Penn State just, I don't know what it is. It just doesn't seem like it trends in the right direction, I would say.
Ohio State is just one more recently. I guess that's a way to pick it, but
yeah,
I don't know. I don't know. That's possible. Sometimes a team has another team's number in recruiting too, and it's kind of unexplainable. You just got to leave it at that, but everybody's got one of those.
Well, never say never, right? Because Penn State's not going to, well, he's committed to Ohio State, so we're going to stop recruiting him. Again, there is that connection. Deion Barnes being from the Philadelphia area, Zahir Mathis is from the Philadelphia area. He has teammates. He knows people that are committed to Penn State. It's going to be a tough uphill battle. And think back to Julian Fleming too, right?
Sure.
Julian Fleming was was the top prospect in the state of Pennsylvania, ended up committing to Ohio State. Now the prodigal wide receiver comes home. But like I said, I keep bringing up multiple examples. It's hard for me to think off the top of my head. Maybe Shane Simmons in this case when he was a 5-star defensive end out of the Maryland area. But I think of Terrell Pryor, Julian Fleming, and now Zahir Mathis kind of adds to this list of Ohio State continually beating out Penn State for the prospect when it's just those two schools head to head.
There's a certain guy for the Cowboys right now, if I remember right, it was Penn State or Ohio State that worked.
Oh, there we go. Micah Parsons. There we go.
Yeah, I mean, everybody thought he was going to Ohio State, and then he ended up at Penn State. So there's the exception, but they need more of those, and I grant you that. So, but Penn State also needs to beat them on the field. Until that happens, they're going to probably lose the majority of these in the recruiting realm.
Well, you've been consistent with that. You said that once Penn State's going to turn the corner and they get all the high-end 4-stars, they might get one like a Denine and a Sutton and a Nicholas Singleton. That's a good start. But if you want more of those game changers, instead of getting lucky and getting one Micah Parsons or one Nicholas Singleton type of player, if you want to get 2 or 3 to put you into that national championship conversation, truly, you have to beat Ohio State or Michigan. One of them. You haven't done it in multiple years now, but that entirely changes, and you've brought that up consistently on this show.
That never goes away, man. These kids have very short memories. Penn State gets hammered by a lot of different people in the media, myself included, because they don't win big games. It's just true. There's no way to get around that until they do. But again, as far as effort goes, and I think they're really good at scouting kids too and fitting their system, Penn State does as good a job as anybody. if they could somehow beat Ohio next year, Ohio State, Lord only knows if they don't beat them next year. If they don't beat them next year, you should storm James Franklin's house and beat down the door and just beat him up. Zach, that's what you should do. So I don't know. They'll be in Happy Valley. So that shouldn't be a great Ohio State team, I don't think.
Brian, that's why I have you on the show, part of because we are both in the Locked On Podcast Network, but your honesty, your bluntness about what Penn State football needs to do and where they are truly at when it comes to recruiting and so much more. So, Brian, thank you for the time as always. And as we get more news about the Alabama situation, I can't wait to have this conversation once again in the very near future.
It could be interesting. I may have to do an emergency podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a podcast coming up at maybe 2:08. So you never know.
But thank you for the time as always, and looking forward to it again.
All right, buddy. Take care.